Hello, and welcome to today's episode of the Fan Game Variety Hour. I'm Jaxon Byrne, and as usual, we'll be covering all types of fan games, both the well-known and the obscure. Let's see here, what's first on the list? First up is a Roblox fan game.
Shovelware Studios is a name I'm sure you're very familiar with if you played Roblox from 2017 to 2019. They were a studio that made obbies based on popular animated films from the time. And while that may sound like these obbies were made on the cheap to cash in on the popularity of these films, Shovelware's obbies were actually pretty damn good. They're remembered fondly, and the studio has a large following to this day. Now, all of these can be considered fan games. They were made without involvement from the copyright holders to all of these franchises, but what if we were to take things one step further and talk about fan games based on fan games? You see, after receiving some DMCA takedowns, Shovelware was forced to take down all of their obbies and shifted their focus towards making original games. But to carry on their legacy, many people have created fan-made obbies inspired by Shovelware's work. Some of these cover franchises that were never the focus of a Shovelware game, such as Baldi's Basics, or Mr. Beast. But there are also some that try to serve as their own unofficial sequels to Shovelware's old games. One of those being Poopypants 3, Jollypants, a fan-made sequel to the studio's Captain Underpants obbies. It follows in the footsteps of the second game, Spookypants, which was themed around Halloween. This one is themed after the next major holiday that people actually care about, Christmas. George and Harold School is hosting a Christmas-themed party now, and the game begins with you and the gang riding in a sleigh to get there, obviously inspired by a similar section in Shovelware's Wimpy Kid obby. We then get to the party, and that's when I start to become a bit worried about the quality of Jollypants. It's a complete copy of the Halloween party in Spookypants, only the dialogue is slightly different and the turbo toilet's green now. Ooh. Even after finishing the battle with the turbo toilet, the scene afterwards is extremely similar to the one from Spookypants, only that Professor P himself isn't here. I was genuinely starting to get worried that this was going to be nothing more than a Christmas-themed reskin of Spookypants, but thankfully, the moment we enter that portal, we go back to some fully original content where the player has to make their way through a snow-covered valley, scaling up both the outside and inside of a mountain before running back down it in a manner similar to the running sections of official Shovelware games. It's after this that the player lands in Press Garden Zone from Sonic Mania, where they come across more platforming challenges such as ninjas or the iconic Shovelware Studios red squares. Eventually, they reach Professor P and you face off against him in a boss fight that's just a copy of the one against the turbo toilet, just longer. After destroying his mech, the gang finds a portal that's able to take them back to school, where they see Professor P running inside of it and decide to chase after him. SpongeBob is also here to give the player the frozen Mr. Krabs to defeat Poopypants as usual, but with a specific request: to finally defrost him. The players trek into the school sewers like in the first Captain Underpants obby, although the lighting is way darker and the giant food from the first game is starting to rot. Despite the best efforts of George and Harold, they aren't fast enough to catch up to Professor P, who is able to get his shrink ray back and flee. The sewage then begins to rise, meaning the player has to make a quick escape out of the sewer, after which they learn that Professor P has revived the turbo toilet and that it's on a rampage, meaning that the player has to run across the city, again, to get to a rendezvous point and meet Weird Al, again. To be fair, the level design in the running section is original, but it looks so similar to the one in the first Poopypants obby that unless you have these games memorized like the back of your hand like I do, it's probably going to be pretty hard to tell. We get to the building and meet Weird Al, who's here alongside a bunch of different characters, including Santa and his elves. Because remember, this started as a Christmas obby. However, instead of using Mr. Krabs to immediately destroy the turbo toilet like last time, Weird Al has a new plan to launch us into the turbo toilet itself and destroy it from the inside. We rush past security, sneak through some guards, and face off against Professor P again in a copy-paste of the turbo toilet fight. After defeating him, the core of the turbo toilet begins to fail, and the player once again uses Mr. Krabs to destroy it and finally unfreeze him. The game ends with the gang at a party, joined by just about every major character from Shovelware's Captain Underpants obbies. The captain himself congratulates us for completing our final quest, ending Poopypants 3, Jollypants. This is a solid game. I don't think it's as good as something Shovelware would have put out back in the day. The platforming can get kinda boring and even mindless, and there are a handful of sections that are highly derivative of or even copy-pasted from Shovelware's official games, but despite that, I think Jollypants is a fun time overall. It serves as a great continuation to what came before, and it was nice to finally see Mr. Krabs get unfrozen, even if it's from a game Shovelware never made.
It wouldn't be an episode of the Fan Game Variety Hour without covering the franchise with more fan games than there are stars in the sky, Sonic the Hedgehog, who in this next game is having a collaboration with Duke Nukem.
Sonic the Hedgehog 3D is an old-school 3D Sonic fan game dating back to the late 2000s and early 2010s. And as I alluded to earlier, the game was built on top of eDuke 32, a source port of Duke Nukem 3D. Gee, if I had a nickel for every time a 3D Sonic fan game was built on top of a 90s first-person shooter, I'd have 2 nickels. Which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it happened twice. Sonic 3D is a game I have a lot of nostalgia for. I never actually played it, but I did see plenty of walkthroughs of the game on YouTube back when I was becoming a Sonic fan. And for whatever reason, I thought this game was the shit. Not that Sonic 3D's bad or anything, but I thought this was the fan game to end all fan games, and I have no idea why. Keep in mind, I became a Sonic fan around 2015 to 2016, meaning that by the time I found out about Sonic 3D, there had been plenty of, not to be rude or anything, better fan games released at this point, such as Sonic 2 HD, Sonic Before and After the sequel. Hell, I'm pretty sure Sonic Utopia released its first demo around this time too. But for old time's sake, I thought I'd include Sonic 3D in an episode of the Fan Game Variety Hour, and fulfill the dreams of a 7-year-old Jaxon. Sonic 3D takes place sometime after the events of Sonic 3 and Knuckles. Dr. Eggman has thought of yet another scheme to build a massive space station, and gets Metal Sonic to steal the Master Emerald in order to use it as a power source. Knuckles mistakes Metal for the real deal, and both he and Mighty, who in this game is Knuckles' sidekick, set out to find the blue blur and get the emerald back. Meanwhile, the real Sonic and Tails learn of Eggman's plan and set off on the tornado to stop him. But due to the tornado running low on fuel, the duo makes an early stop at the first zone in the game, Green Island. The gameplay formula for Sonic 3D is very similar to another 3D Sonic fan game I mentioned just a moment ago, Sonic Robo Blast 2. The game, just like Robo Blast 2, tries to take the classic formula and adapt it to 3D as accurately as possible. Sonic doesn't even have his homing attack, which can make destroying certain enemies a bit of a pain. This game makes a pretty good case as to why it's necessary for a 3D Sonic game. Sonic 3D has 3 zones. The aforementioned Green Island, which is a mix between your standard Green Hill S stage with a ruin stage, Ancient Palace, a full-on ruin stage complete with a lava and jungle, and Fuel Base, which is your run-of-the-mill Eggman base. Fuel Base is only 1 act, while both Green Island and Ancient Palace consist of 3. 2 are normal platforming stages, and the 3rd is dedicated to a boss fight. The first of these is a fight against Knuckles, who, after defeating him, learns who actually stole the Master Emerald and teams up with you, and the second is against Eggman. The player is also able to enter a special stage if they finish Act 1 or 2 with 50 or more rings. They're placed in a closed environment and forced to collect a certain amount of rings under a time limit. And that's Sonic the Hedgehog 3D. Yeah, there wasn't as much of this game as I remember there being. It was never fully completed, leading to a bunch of stages and even a Sonic 06 themed expansion of the game being scrapped. And as of 2025, the game abruptly ends after completing the first act of Fuel Base. There's not even an ending cutscene, it just goes directly to the credits. And with only 3 zones, one of which isn't even fully completed, it makes Sonic 3D a very short game to finish. you could beat it in 35 minutes or less. So why is my recording of it double that length? Well, it's because of one small but very annoying thing. Buttons. Not like controller buttons, I mean buttons in the game itself. You see, something that Sonic 3D loves to do is lock you in a room and force you to find and press a button or switch in order to progress. The game starts out pretty tame with the first level, Green Island Zone Act 1. The only time you're required to press a button is to access this completely optional cave area. However, they immediately begin overusing buttons starting with the second level, Green Island Act 2. Sonic and Tails will get stuck at a dead end and forced to find and press a few buttons in order to open a path to continue the stage, where they then have to press more buttons, this time by placing old ceramics on them, in order to get out of the ancient temple they're in and back onto the beach where the level ends. And they keep doing this as the game goes on. It's really annoying, because you'll be having a really fun time running around as Sonic before you realize that you're going around in circles and need to find a button to progress, which can be kinda hard to do. I know that sounds ridiculous to say, they're big silver and red circles, how can they be that hard to find? Well, after a while, the devs begin using the easy-to-spot red and silver buttons less often in favor of switches and command consoles that you would mistake for set dressing in any other Sonic game. But when it isn't doing that, Sonic 3D is a pretty fun game. Is it God's gift to gaming like I thought it was when I first saw it? No, not even close. But it's still mostly enjoyable, just very much a product of its time.
But what about the complete opposite of Sonic 3D? What about an old school Sonic fan game that has actually aged well? Well, that's exactly what we're going to be taking a look at next.
Sonic Rebirth is an old school 2D Sonic fan game dating back to around the same time period as Sonic 3D. Unlike Sonic 3D though, which was an original game, Rebirth is instead a remake of Sonic 1, pulling aspects from both the Genesis and Master System versions of the game to create the definitive version of Sonic 1. Starting with the most obvious change, the graphics of Sonic 1 have received a complete overhaul, going for a look more reminiscent of the modern Sonic games at the time, and Sonic himself reminds me of how he looks in Brawl, although that might just be me. In addition to the graphical overhaul, Rebirth also adds some cutscenes to Sonic 1. They're nothing that'll blow you away or have you rethink how you saw Sonic 1's story. They appear so infrequently they feel like a jump scare when they do show up again, but it's nice that they're even here. Tails is also made playable in this version of the game, but I didn't play as him for this video, so let's move on. Like I said earlier, this game not only tries to remake the Genesis version of Sonic 1, but also its Master System and Game Gear counterpart. All of the original zones from the 8-bit Sonic 1 appear in Rebirth with the exception of Sky Base, most likely because the devs didn't want 2 final zones in the game. You might think that the Master System and Game Gear levels would clash with the Genesis ones due to how they were built around the way Sonic controlled in the 8-bit version of the game, but they actually mesh together surprisingly well. They don't feel out of place at all. Speaking of controls, how does Sonic feel to play in Rebirth? He alright. It's not a perfect recreation of the Genesis physics. You can find plenty of moments where they're off, but for about 90% of the time, they're pretty on point. Not the special stages though. They've received a complete overhaul from how they work in not only the Genesis, but even the Master System versions of the game. You still access them by finishing a level with 50 or more rings, but the special stages themselves are completely different. You're dumped in an area inspired by the special stages of the 8-bit Sonic 1, but instead of collecting a bunch of rings and getting to the goal like in those special stages, the objective here is to collect 250 rings, after which a Chaos Emerald will spawn in at a random point in the level, and the player will have to make their way to it. All of this has to be done in under 60 seconds. Which might not sound like enough time at first, but it's actually just tight enough so that if you're skilled, you'll be able to do both things with time to spare. Overall, Sonic Rebirth is a good remake, although I wouldn't really consider it the definitive version of the game, not only due to the small inaccuracies with its physics engine, but also because of another, much larger issue with the game. You can't beat it. Rebirth is a mostly pretty polished game, even if its physics aren't always accurate to the source material. But to make up for that, it has some of the worst softlocks in a video game I've ever seen. Take this one in Scrap Brain Zone Act 2 for example. This teleporter is glitched and will send you to the top of the stage with no way to escape. But you can take the highest possible route to avoid it and finish the level. A much worse one would have to be during the game's ending. After Robotnik leaves here, I'm assuming what would be some sort of cutscene and credit sequence should play. But Sonic just stays stuck here in an exploding base. And I wasn't able to find any fixes online, so I technically wasn't able to beat Rebirth for this video, even if I did experience all of its content. Outside of those softlocks though, Rebirth is a pretty fun game even with all this time that's passed. It's not the best version of Sonic 1 like it was setting out to do, but if you want a new way to experience the game, I'd give it a shot. Just make sure to take the top path in Scrap Brain Zone Act 2, and be prepared to get soft locked during the game's ending.
Alright, that's enough Sonic for one video. For our next game, we're going to be taking a look at the best type of fan game, the Unreal Engine tech demo.
I'm gonna try and keep this section of the video pretty brief, since like I mentioned a moment ago, this next game we're looking at is a tech demo, so there's not much to talk about. The game is simply titled Cars, although I'm going to call it Cars the Fan Game for the rest of this video. Developed by Matt Developpe with some additional assets provided by William A., who a lot of Cars fans might know best for reanimating a bunch of the series' deleted scenes on his YouTube channel. Look, he even commented on a video I made last December. Ain't that neat? Produced in Unreal Engine 5, this demo serves as a proof of concept for what a Cars game on the engine could be like. After getting through the menu, most of which isn't functional because, like I said, tech demo, very early in development, the player is dumped into a test map. This contains a basic and unfinished recreation of Radiator Springs itself, collectible items, multiple terrain and material tests, some basic NPCs, a couple of event markers, and even a place where you can go off of the map and into the void. Now this is some top tier gaming. As you can tell by looking at the menus and gameplay, Cars the Fan Game is heavily inspired by the original Cars video games, with your character even having a boost and jump that function in a similar manner. That being said, it's still in a completely different game engine, so it's not exactly one-to-one. I personally didn't like the jump in this game very much. Unlike the one in the THQ Cars games, you have no control over yourself in midair, and I hope that's something that gets addressed in a future update. But outside of the jump, driving in this game feels pretty damn good. As for the event markers I mentioned earlier, they're nothing that crazy. Like I said, very early in development, there isn't much to this game right now. There are 3 events in the test map: a road race, a Piston Cup race, and Ramones. The road and Piston Cup races don't exist yet, so they just take you back to the title screen. But just like the original Cars games, Ramones allows you to customize your character by changing the color of their boost and paint job, although I wasn't able to get the second one to work, maybe it will get added in later, as well as selecting other characters from the franchise, although not all of them are available yet. They're fun to mess around with, but you can tell number 95 was given the most attention, as these other characters are either missing or have broken animations, or are completely untextured like Red. Overall, while there's not much to it at the moment, I think this tech demo does a good job with what it sets out to do. It's a great proof of concept, not only for how a remake of the original Cars video games could work, but also for just what a new Cars game in general could be. Keep in mind, the last Cars game we ever got, that wasn't a defunct mobile game, was Driven to Win, and that came out almost 10 years ago. So while this is an extremely basic demo and might not ever be anything more than that, I still appreciate the effort that was put into it and how it shows that this franchise still has some steam left in it. In terms of video games, I've said this a million times, but I don't think Cars 4 should ever be a thing. Links to both Matt and William's channels will be in the description.
And with that, we're down to our final game in today's episode, Super SpongeBob SquarePants 2. In case you're wondering why I'm not talking about Super SpongeBob 1 in this video, it's because it doesn't exist.
Super SpongeBob SquarePants 2, if the name wasn't obvious, is a SpongeBob fan game taking inspiration from the franchise's first ever video game, Legend of the Lost Spatula, alongside the classic Mega Man games and old school bootleg games. Mainly those from Hummer Team, a bootleg developer for the NES best known for games like Kart Fighter and Samari. That's why this game is called Super SpongeBob 2 when there isn't a Super SpongeBob 1. It's supposed to be a callback to the goofy names a bunch of bootleg games have. The plot's pretty simple. The Flying Dutchman tries to steal one of Mr. Krabs' golden spatulas. He fails to steal it, but tells the crustacean he still has way more than just the one he tried to steal. Patrick was eavesdropping on the whole thing, and gives SpongeBob a map to the Dutchman's other golden spatulas, and he sets out to find them. SpongeBob has a pretty basic moveset. He can run, jump, double jump, blow his bubble wand, and do a karate chop. He's technically the only playable character, although there will be certain sections where he rides on Patrick like he's a Yoshi. His moveset is almost identical to SpongeBob's, although instead of a karate chop, he does a belly flop similar to the one in Battle for Bikini Bottom. Both characters aren't perfect. There are plenty of platforms that require you to press the jump button as you land on them to launch SpongeBob higher, and since he has a double jump, it was extremely easy for me to accidentally double jump and launch myself into the void, but that only really comes up in a couple of levels. They're pretty fun to play as regardless. The game follows a very similar structure to the classic Sonic games, more specifically Sonic 1 and CD. There are 6 worlds SpongeBob travels across, all of which are divided into 3 levels. 2 are normal platforming stages where the player has to go from point A to B, and 1 is a slightly shorter platforming stage that ends with a boss fight. Hey, just like Sonic 3D. These boss fights are against one of SpongeBob's many foes from across the series' history, and include characters from the show such as Plankton and Karen, Master Udon, the Dutchman like I mentioned earlier, and even the Bonbon guy from that one episode. But it doesn't just stop at characters from the show, as we also get to see characters like Dennis from the first SpongeBob movie, and even Robot SpongeBob from Battle for Bikini Bottom. And that's really all I have to say about Super SpongeBob 2 on the gameplay front. What you see is what you get. A really fun and high quality 2D platformer starring Nickelodeon's Cash Cow. But one more thing that I do want to mention is how authentic it is. It might look like it, but this is no NES homebrew game. It's made with Click Team Fusion and can only be played on PC. But despite that, it genuinely looks like an NES game and replicates all of the graphical oddities you'd find in a real one perfectly. Same thing with the soundtrack. It replicates the slightly off-key and strange-sounding music of bootleg NES games perfectly. There's only really one problem I can see people having with this game, and that's the difficulty. You see, in addition to replicating the look and feel of an NES game, it also tries to replicate the tough-as-nails difficulty a lot of them had. And outside of being able to turn off lives in the options menu, there's nothing that can be done to make the player's experience easier. It doesn't make or break the game for me personally, but I could definitely see it preventing others from being able to enjoy it. So just keep that in mind if you're interested in playing this game. But as an overall package, Super SpongeBob 2 is a great game and tribute to the SpongeBob series. And despite being unofficial, I think that it's genuinely one of the best games with this character's face slapped onto it. And I can't think of a better fan game to end this video on than one like that.
And with that concludes today's episode of the Fan Game Variety Hour. I hope you enjoyed this little look into all these different fan games. And if you're still around, make sure to leave a comment on if you maybe have any prior experience with the games covered in this video, or if you have anything to say about fan games in general. But for now, I hope you enjoyed, and this is Jackson Byrne, signing off.